about the organizational matrix. We've discussed the social justice questions and the learner expectations. We're going to see how and also the Quint project. We're now going to take it to the next step and plan our lessons and see how our lesson planning will lead up into skills and strategies that students need to learn in order to create their project. So we're going to talk about lesson planning today. The first thing is, what is the purpose of lesson planning? Well, according to the Domain 3 of the Connecticut Common Core of Teaching, which is planning for active learning, teachers plan instruction in order to engage students in rigorous and relevant learning and to promote their curiosity about the world at large, which is part of what we'll be doing when we have our Quint projects every Quint, where students it needs to be rigorous and also needs to relate to the world in which they live in. So why do we create lesson plans? Teachers create lesson plans to serve as guides in helping students achieve intended learning outcomes. For example, the lesson plan describes what the teacher expects the student to know, understand, and be able to do, how the student will be engaged in the learning, and the evidence that the teacher will accept that the student has demonstrated mastery of the identified knowledge, skills, and concepts noted. So those are the reasons as to why we have to create lesson plans. So why do we, again, and another reason why we create lesson plans, it's also because it has to be a key component in developing a quality lesson plan is being very specific, not very general, but being very specific as to how you are going to target specific learning goals. And a well-written lesson plan contains a set of elements that are descriptive in the process. They're descriptive so that, again, we understand how is it a teacher is going to make sure students meet their goals or students meet the objectives of the lesson. Now, you may be wondering, so why are lesson plans reviewed? Lesson plans are reviewed to ensure that the teacher has a definite goal for the teacher in the class. There needs to be a purpose as to why you're teaching the class. What is your goal for them? What would you like for them to learn? It's also used as a guide to understand the teacher's strategies for implementing the lessons. So how are you going to, if a student needs to learn, for example, summarizing, how are you going to do that? What are the things you're going to do in order for them to understand that? So, for lesson plans need to include lessons that teach skills and strategies that students will use to complete their interdisciplinary projects. All the lessons that you're teaching within a particular Quint should have some relevance to your interdisciplinary project. They should lead up to the final project. So at the end, students will apply the skills to completing their project. They should also address the individual needs of the students. So of course, all your students are not the same. They don't learn the same, but your lesson plans should tailor to their learning needs. And they should be emailed to Ms. Ruddick or myself every Monday. We use a rubric when giving feedback for a lesson plan, and these are the things that we look for. So here are the components of the lesson plans. It has to have an outline, objectives, activities. There also needs to be some differentiation, some connection to the social justice and learner expectation, and also assessments. Here's an example of the rubric that we use to provide feedback to teachers when we look at the lesson plans. It's not used to evaluate you, but just to see how you are meeting the needs of the students, how you teaching and making sure that students are reaching the goals that you intend for them to do. And we're going to go into specifics of each of the components of this lesson plan. We do use a scale, a scale to give you feedback. For example, a score of a 3 exceeds expectation. Score of a 2 is where you meet expectation. A 1 is approaching expectation, and a 0 is does not meet expectation. And all those scores are tallied, and then you get an overall score. So the outline of your lesson plan should be, the outline of your lesson plan should have an outline of every activity that you're going to teach. Within that outline, it should provide a clear but also a brief description of the activity, or describe the reference of the text or curriculum document that you use to that you're going to use for your activity. And I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like. So here's an example of what a day-to-day outline looks like. Starts off with your name, the grade that you're teaching, the week, the learner expectation for the quint. And then in this case, this teacher referenced the the Hartford Read Aloud program that they're going to use for their Read Aloud. So that's taken right from, the Read Aloud lesson plan. And then also you should include your centers, a brief summary of what each center will be, including the differentiation for the center as well. Now, objectives. All lesson plans need to have objectives, or all activities should have some kind of objective. What is it you want the students to be able to learn? So your objective should be written using the statement, students will be able to. And then that should be followed up by a verb from Bloom's taxonomy, because that will show what skill are they working on. So what are they going to do? Are they going to distinguish, sort, predict, interpret, and then include a statement that shows what are they going to do that shows that they mastered the objective. So what is that evidenced by? Which should be the assessment that determines whether the students have met the objective. The objective should also be accompanied by a measurable goal students should meet to accomplish the objective. And I'm going to show you some examples of that right now. So for example, students will be able to sort and classify. The two verbs are sort and classify a group of rocks and minerals using observational skills. They will do this, they will show this by completing a graphic organizer using visual, textual, and other physical qualities, completed with at least 80% of accuracy. So again, we have our two verbs of sorting and classifying. They're showing that they're going to be able to do that by completing the graphic organizer, and with the hope that 80% of the students will be able to do that accurately. Another one, students will be able to distinguish, the verb again, between rocks and minerals as evidenced by, this is the evidence, a written observation of the visual characteristics and conclusions for each sample. So again, they're going to write down their observations, which will therefore determine if they were able to distinguish between a rock and a mineral. Another example from the humanities side is that students will be able to identify supporting details of a text, explain why certain details are included in a text, and explain the theme of the story as evidenced by the George Crumb Read Aloud, Read and Response Essential Task. Now this objective is 3 combined into 1, because they have to first of all identify the supporting details, explain, another verb again, why certain details are included in a text, and then explain the theme of the story. So this example has 3 parts to it. And this is all evidenced by their read and respond question, or the essential task for the story. Another one for humanities, students will be able to determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in a text, as evidenced by the completion of the Word Wide Web. Again, they have to determine what the word or phrase means, and they will show this by completing the Word Wide Web. That will show if they were able to figure out the meaning of the unknown word. Now, you will have activities. After your objectives, you will list out your activities for the lesson plan. So, a variety of group settings should be utilized throughout the week in flexible and creative ways. Within your activities, it should not just focus on whole class. You should use a variety of ways in which to carry out your activities. That could be a whole class, small groups, level groups, and if you level them, what are you using to determine their level? Is it mixed ability groups, pairs and partners, cooperative, independent, or teacher guided? And there should be a variety of supports used to facilitate the various groupings. I will show you some activities which incorporates all of this into the description of the activity. For example, we have a condensation lab. First thing that students will do is to watch a brain pop video. Then they will complete an inquiry lab, and then they'll record their observations and write conclusions in the lab packet. And then they'll have a discussion with some follow-up guiding questions. Very brief, it's clear, so if someone else was to cover the class, they would be able to carry out the activity. It looks as if it's going to start off whole class, and then they're going to work with partners to complete the lab. And then they'll come back, regroup again, to discuss the questions, to see if students understood what the lab